The study of biology has been critical in building our understanding of living things, the world around us, and ourselves. In the entire field, no idea has been more influential than the theory of evolution. In fact, you may hear the phrase, "nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution." Now, this isn't to say that before Charles Darwin wrote his book, people had no idea what a cow was. But when evolution was proposed, everything started coming into perspective. And now evolution is firmly established as the backbone of the study of biology. Approximately 99% of scientists agree that humans evolved from earlier species of animals. Despite this, only around 54% of US adults agree. So in this video, I want to clear up some common misunderstandings. First, it's important to address a common misunderstanding of the word theory. In everyday use, theory often refers to a guess or a hunch, but in scientific contexts, a theory is a body of ideas that explain what has been found in data, and which can be used to make predictions about what we should find in similar situations. But before an idea can be called a theory, it must be intensively scrutinized and substantiated. A theory is the highest level of certainty that an idea can reach in science. You might think that this would be a law, but in science, laws are mathematical descriptions of what happens in a particular circumstance. Laws describe and theories explain. Now let's define evolution. In formal contexts, the most accepted definitions of biological evolution describe it as a change in the relative frequency of inherited characteristics within a population of organisms between successive generations. This means evolution has occurred whenever certain genes become more or less common in a population from one generation to the next. You might hear evolution described as a process of random chance, but this is overly simplistic. While some factors of evolution are effectively random, like mutations, there are mechanisms of evolution which drive it in a non-random fashion, such as natural selection. But evolution isn't driven by a goal either. There's no end result that evolution is moving towards. Despite this, you might hear evolution described as a process that makes organisms quote-unquote better, stronger, faster, smarter, and overall better at surviving. This definition makes sense with how evolution is often presented, but it's a bit short-sighted. While evolution by natural selection tends to produce adaptations for survival, this is specifically within the particular conditions of the environment that they're living in. And there's a more important factor than an organism's ability to survive, its ability to reproduce. It just so happens that surviving tends to make organisms more likely to reproduce, as you might imagine. But how do these adaptations come about in the first place? This is also a pretty big source of misunderstandings, often fueled by the media around us. In franchises like Pokemon, creatures quote-unquote evolve right before your eyes. This has given some the idea that evolution is something that an animal can go through during its life, changing its features and passing these changes down to its offspring, or that animals consciously evolve to adapt to their environment. But this isn't really what evolution means, not by our modern understanding at least. This does, however, match up pretty well with the earlier hypothesis of Lamarckian evolution, named after the zoologist who popularized the idea, Jean-Baptiste Lamarck. To explain the long necks of giraffes, a Lamarckian conclusion might be that a giraffe's neck grows longer from a life spent stretching to reach the leaves of trees. In addition, the Lamarckian perspective would conclude that a child of the giraffe would be born with the long neck that its parent had acquired in its life. A more evolutionarily accurate explanation would be that giraffes have long necks and legs because as the trees evolved to grow taller, giraffes with longer necks were more likely to reproduce due to being more capable of feeding from the taller trees. These might seem similar. The most important distinction here is that in the evolutionary perspective, the neck length of a baby giraffe isn't impacted by how much the parents stretch their necks, but rather by the genetics they got from their parents, plus any mutations in their genes which may impact how long their neck grows. Here's where we meet another misconception. You might be asking, why would a mutation help giraffes? Mutations are bad things, right? They certainly can be, but it's more complicated than that. A mutation is simply any difference between a duplicated gene and the original copy of the gene. These happen for a variety of reasons, including exposure to radiation and certain chemicals, but also because while the cellular systems involved in maintaining and duplicating DNA are very good, they're not perfect, and for the most part, that's fine. Believe it or not, you the viewer are a mutant, and I don't just mean that as an insult to most of you. Most mutations are neutral, either not changing the way the genes are expressed, or changing gene expression in a way that doesn't have a noticeable effect on the organism's life. However, sometimes gene expression is changed in a way that does produce important differences. These can be good, bad, or even a mix of both. Take the famous example of peppered moths. Prior to large-scale coal pollution, these moths were typically white with black spots, which let them blend in better with lichen-covered bark and stones, camouflaging them from birds. However, there were some rare individuals in the population which were completely black due to an inherited mutation. These black moths stood out to predators, and were therefore eaten more often. But during the Industrial Revolution, when soot from burnt coal made these surfaces darker, the black moths had an advantage at staying undetected by birds, and the lighter-colored moths were easier to see. Because of this, the dark-colored moths became the most common, and light-colored moths became rare. Now that coal isn't as commonly used for fuel, the dark moths stand out again, and therefore the lighter ones are most common. Now this might not really be enough for some of you. So what? Some moths went through a goth phase. That's not evolution, they're still moths after all. They didn't turn into butterflies or anything. Evolution doesn't predict that one group of organisms will evolve into a separate pre-existing group of organisms. In the field of taxonomy, which we use to sort organisms by evolutionary relationships, any descendants of a taxonomic group of organisms will always remain in the same clades that their ancestors belonged to, alongside all other descendants of that clade. So why am I so concerned about evolution denial? As the central tenet of biology, and one of science's most influential theories, evolution is supported by evidence from all the fields that have an ability to test it. So evolution denial sets the stage for a much wider denial of science and reason. This has led many to hold the belief that scientists have come together to devise a nefarious conspiracy to make people believe in evolution. For some reason. Surely an evil one, I'd presume. As this idea places mistrust in a huge portion of the scientific community, it has a major impact on an individual's scientific literacy, and increases their vulnerability to misinformation. Hopefully this video has been able to improve your understanding of evolution, so that you can have an easier time understanding its more complex details.